Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Community Foundation for Palm Beach and Martin Counties, welcome to the inaugural Partnering for Good breakfast. I'm Mary Catherine Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Philanthropic Services here at the Community Foundation. And I do this alongside a team of very talented experts in charitable and planned giving, grant making, and connecting with the community on our greatest needs. We are so excited to welcome you here this morning for our first exclusive event for professional advisors. And we are calling it Partnering for Good because that's really the Community Foundation's value proposition. We are here to help you and your clients amplify philanthropy on issues that challenge every corner of our counties. Our power is our knowledge and our know-how. Not only do we know the issues facing our neighbors and our neighborhoods, we know the nonprofit organizations who are on the front lines of those issues. Nonprofits that have been vetted, tested, and recommended thanks to the proven track record and success of the Foundation's rigorous standards. Our team stands at the ready to help your clients get closer to the causes they love most and help you to increase your toolkit when it comes to the trends in philanthropy and charitable giving. And that is why we are here this morning. So please, help me thank the Women Leading for Good Committee who helped to conceive and create today's event. I'd like to ask the committee to please stand to be recognized. Many of these women are also part of the Community Foundation's network of professional advisor ambassadors, the Philanthropic Advisory Council, which we affectionately call our PAC. We also want to thank the PAC for helping us to expand our impact alongside their clients and their peers, and for encouraging many of you to come and join us this morning. I'd like to ask our council to please stand and be recognized. Now, it is my honor to introduce you to our Board of Directors Chair, Julie Fisher Cummings. Julie's work bridges academia, public service, and policy reform. She has dedicated over 40 years to civic leadership locally and nationally through her positions at the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, the Lord's Place, the Jewish Federation of the Palm Beaches, the Jewish Women's Foundation for the Palm Beaches, the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, and the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation. She is also the co-founder of the Promise Fund, the Love Light Fund, and the Women's Funding Alliance. She is a visionary leader, a compassionate advocate, and a strategic partner in giving for good. Please help me welcome Julie Fisher Cummings.
Oh, it's so nice to see so many people in this room. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Mary Catherine. I'm privileged to welcome you on behalf of the board of the Community Foundation, and we are so excited to host today's event because we believe the people in this room, all of you, the professional advisors, estate attorneys, and everyone who works to help their clients achieve their philanthropic goals are so critically important to fueling the impact of our local needs. We endeavor to be your premier partner in our area to connect you and your clients to those philanthropic solutions that can help our region now and in the future. And we know that our success depends on your ability to communicate confidently to your clients about our area's greatest needs and the best ways to meet them. That's where we can partner with you, particularly as it applies to as philanthropy evolves, as we're going to hear today. You know, the way philanthropy has been done through the Community Foundation was really a pass-through, and that's changing. We are no longer that kind. We do that, of course. You can partner with us through our DAFs, but we are also a true partner in helping people make a difference on the causes closest to their hearts. That is why we're so excited to hear from Phil Buchanan of the Center for Effective Philanthropy this morning. MacKenzie Scott has changed the way we do philanthropy with her no strings attached, a trend that no doubt you've seen in the news. Just 2 weeks ago, she made a transformational gift to Palm Beach County's Urban League for $5.1 million. And I know you will agree that can be really a big deal in our area. Today, Phil is going to share the center's study on the impact of MacKenzie's giving, the impact on the receiving organizations, and the ripple effect it has on our fellow philanthropists. Phil is the president for the Center for Impact Philanthropy and a passionate advocate for the importance of philanthropy in the nonprofit sector. He was hired in 2001 as their first CEO, and he's led the growth to becoming the leading provider of data and insight on philanthropic effectiveness. He's also the author of Giving Done Right, Effective Philanthropy and Making Every Dollar Count, which was named by Inside Philanthropy as the best philanthropy book of the year, a book that I have found most helpful, as you can tell, it's tabbed, and one we will be offering to each and every one of you. It is truly, I mean, it's like incredible guide to how to do it, for not only for people in the, who want to do philanthropy, but for you to help your philanthropists and your clients do their work. Darren Walker, the CEO of the Ford Foundation, one of the leading foundations in our country, describes Phil's leadership as being not only defined by his brain or the extensive knowledge he brings to the table, it is also defined by his heart. In 2016, Phil was named the Nonprofit Times Influence of the Year, and he has been named 11 times to that publication's Power and Influence Top 50 list. He serves on the board of directors of the National Council of Aging. He was born in Toronto, grew up in Oregon, and before attending Wesleyan, where he majored in government. He also has an MBA from Harvard, and he lives in Concord, Massachusetts, with his wife and 2 daughters and a dog. That's nice. I bet it's a great dog, too. Oh, yeah. Dogs are important. We're truly privileged to have him here today, so please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning, everyone. Julie, that was very kind. And, having a book that's named Best Philanthropy Book of the Year is a little bit like, I don't know, being named like Best Vegan Cookbook of 1952, because there aren't that many books about philanthropy. So it's great to be with you all. I believe, Danita, you can confirm or deny, but that actually you all wanted to invite my colleague Grace Nicolette here, and she couldn't do it, so you're stuck with me. But the timing is great because we just released a report yesterday that I want to tell you all about. And you'll have to sort of bear with me because aside from a webinar we had yesterday with 1,500 people, because there's a lot of interest in this study, I haven't presented this research before because we just finished it. So you're the first, really, to get to hear about it. So let me tell you a little bit about it. Let me go the right way. So I think most of you are probably not, correct me if I'm wrong, advising donors with like $30 billion in assets, right? But so you may say, like, how could MacKenzie Scott's approach be relevant to us, since we're working with donors who have maybe more modest means. But I think, and you can tell me after, I think you will find that it is relevant, that there's some really important lessons. So let me remind you of what MacKenzie Scott has done. Obviously, we all know who she is, and the wealth originated in her ownership of Amazon stock. And she kind of burst onto the philanthropic scene in July 2020. And I will note that there's another screen over there for those of you who find it a little hard to look here, whatever's easiest, giving $1.7 billion to 116 organizations. I finished this slide deck this weekend, and it said she has given nearly $13 billion. Actually, it's higher than that now. She made another announcement on Monday of a whole slew of gifts, some of which have been counted in that number, some of which hadn't. So I think we're up to about $14 billion. Now, I've been around, as Julie noted, a long time in this little Philanthrolandia, and I kind of roll my eyes anytime somebody says, oh, here's a donor with a new approach that's upending philanthropy. They're reinventing, they're disrupting, because it's usually BS. It's usually old wine, new bottle, right? I think Harry Truman is supposed to have said there is nothing new in the world except the history you do not know. And I kind of feel that way about these bold announcements. But this really is quite something, what MacKenzie Scott is doing. It's not that any particular element of her approach has never been done. It's that she's put it together in a kind of amazing way. So what am I talking about? Talking about large gifts. We're going to talk about how large. I mean, these are order of magnitude different than the gifts from big donors and foundations. Unrestricted and very little in the way of reporting requirements. I think there's some other elements too that are really important. A focus on equity, racial equity, also equity for LGBTQ people, other communities. That is a pronounced sort of thread in her giving. And then, of course, the unusual structure of her giving. So she did not establish a foundation. She is giving through donor advised funds at various entities with vetting being done by the Bridgespan Group, which is a big nonprofit consultancy, and involvement of her family office, which is called Lost Horse. And she has been very private about it all. So given the sort of distinct nature of her approach, we wanted to study it. We thought, what an interesting natural experiment. Now, let me tell you that we received a $10 million gift at the Center for Effective Philanthropy in May, June 2021. Rest assured, we did not survey or interview ourselves. And some folks asked us, well, don't you have a conflict, right, if you got a grant? And I thought, well, we'll be totally transparent. And the reality is the nonprofit world is divided into two groups, those who have received a gift from MacKenzie Scott and those who desperately want one, right? So because it was described explicitly as a one-time gift, I think we actually have more freedom to just tell it like it is, right? And that's what we always do anyway, so you just have to trust me on that. So our board, when I told them, I had my colleague call together our board on Zoom, and everybody thought I was about to tell them that I had some terrible illness or whatever. So just note to self for future, if you're getting your board together, you might want to tell them whether it's good news or bad news if it's a special meeting. But anyway, I told them we got this gift, and they said we should really study it. And so the research questions that we wanted to ask are, do nonprofits believe this gift has increased their impact, and in what ways? How are folks spending the money, and what can we learn from that? And have there been unintended negative consequences? We did raise for this gift, for this research project, and it's entirely funded by these foundations. So just to give them the credit where it's due. And what we did was survey the leaders of organizations that received a gift in one of MacKenzie Scott's first 3 rounds of giving from summer of 2020 to summer of 2021. And then we did in-depth interviews with 40 more. So interesting just to say that the organizations tend in that first year of her giving to be direct service organizations to a greater degree than the representation in the nonprofit sector broadly. And I think that has something to do with the pandemic and what was happening at the time. Also, a lot of advocacy organizations, as you can see. So, first finding. I don't like it when people read slides to me, but there's some words that I'm going to read because they're important. Nonprofit leaders describe these large unrestricted grants as transformational for their organizations and their leadership. They believe the funding is significantly strengthening their ability to achieve the organization's missions, for which many of those organizations is connected to equity. So first, and it's really the words of the nonprofit leaders that I want you to take in, because, like I said, I've been doing this work for a long time. I've heard a lot of emotion in the voices of nonprofit leaders talking about funders, but usually it's negative emotion. It's frustration, right? In this case, there were a lot of tears of gratitude. So let's just look at what people said. The amount of money didn't even feel real. What felt more real was the pride and validation that the work I was doing mattered and somebody had noticed. Another leader said, I was left in awe. I didn't know what to say except thank you. Our core values were repeated back to us as we were given this gift and investment. I thought, wow, we can now support the growth of our organization and concentrate on our work, not the fundraising needed. And again, that's because the size of the grant, as I said, $8 million at the median, order of magnitude different than what we see in our database at CEP of tens of thousands of grants made by hundreds of larger staff foundations. The median grant for that group, $100,000. $8 million at the median for MacKenzie Scott compared to $100,000 grant as the typical grant for larger staffed foundations. Even the very large foundations, the biggest ones, their median grants might be a few $100,000, $800,000, $1 million. Nobody's giving at this level. So you can imagine then that people overwhelmingly say that this grant significantly strengthened their organization's ability to achieve its mission, the long-term financial stability of their organization, and the long-term organizational capacity of their organization. And pretty much everybody who didn't check significantly checked moderately. And interestingly, folks said it has really helped them to advance their equity work. This may be hard to read. I'm sorry, this is a really long room. So just trust me that overwhelmingly people said that the gift significantly helped to advance their racial equity work, their economic mobility work, as well as health equity, and then smaller percentages, but still meaningful, pointing to gender equity and LGBTQ plus equity. Well, why would that be? I think it's in part because this can be difficult work to fundraise for. And again, I want to tell you what the nonprofit leaders told us. So one said, what are they talking about when they're talking about advancing equity? One said, we registered more than 2 million voters. We were able to close the voter registration gap between the white electorate and folks of color. We were able to pivot after an election or during an election to connect with people around voter registration or voter education and turnout, to engage them, organize them on issues that they care about in their community. Another leader said, most of our communities do not have depository institutions or banks. This is an organization that's serving indigenous people. When COVID shut down entire communities, when savings started depleting, there were no more resources coming in, but individuals were able to get a short-term emergency loan. The Scott Grant kept heat on in the deadliest of winters for our residents. It fed individuals who would not be able to put food on the table. So very meaningful impact for the organizations, for what they were able to do. Something we didn't really expect, though, is the personal impact on the leaders. They talked to us about how this gift changed their mindset from scarcity to abundance, that it gave them, as you heard in one of the previous comments, a sense of relief and breathing room more opportunity for innovation and risk-taking. And yes, some self-imposed pressure, like you better not mess this up, is how I think some people felt. So again, this was particularly pronounced for leaders of color. And it's really interesting to look at just the demographic characteristics of the leaders. In our survey respondents for that first year, it's a much more racially diverse group of leaders than leaders of foundation grantees in general. So this is rough, so don't write this down or quote me on this, but if in our data set of nonprofit leaders at foundations, about, I think, 76, 77% of leaders identify as white, for MacKenzie Scott's grantees, it was more like 55, 56%, something like that. So what did leaders of color say to us? I've been told about 2 million times that organizations led by women of color get less than others. So I was nervous about this because I'm thinking, man, I hope that who I am doesn't cheat this organization out of opportunities, you know? And that's a sad thing to even admit to you, but I did think that. And this grant really helped because what it did was it also positioned being a woman of color as an asset and not a liability. Another leader said, leader of color, she trusts the leaders in ways that even our foundations here that make us jump through really stupid hoops for $50,000 and then require all of this bullshit of us don't. You know, that's pretty remarkable, and it kind of sends a signal which I hope will be one that more funders want to emulate. Okay, second finding. Nonprofits are using the grant money to help those they seek to serve by improving or expanding their existing work and engaging in new work, often bringing on new staff to take on that work. Most are also using the money to improve their organization's financial stability and to fairly compensate and support staff. So folks made prompt decisions. So I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase absorptive capacity, but you know, I have, and it's usually used in the context of, we can't make bigger grants, Phil, because these organizations lack the absorptive capacity to handle those grants. They will sink under the pressure, or they don't know what to do with that kind of money. And you know, it turns out like that's a crock, essentially, right? Now, granted, these were carefully vetted organizations, but they knew what to do with the resources, and they made quick decisions. They've generally decided how to use nearly all of the money. That's not to say they've spent it all, but they've decided, sometimes in broad buckets, like by creating a strategic opportunities fund, for example. And they're not like the proverbial, you know, drunken soldier spending it all in one place. They are being thoughtful and spreading it across different expenses. And so, like I said, the typical respondent had spent less than 30% of the funds, but folks generally have figured out what they're going to do with the funds. So what are they doing? And this one's going to be a little hard to read, so I apologize. So I'm just going to walk you through the fact that they're expanding what they do. They're just reaching more people. They're doing more program work. So supporting new or existing work, that's almost everybody, new programmatic initiatives, number of constituents served increased, improve existing work. Activities supporting the mission, so new collaborations and partnerships, expanding measurement and evaluation, raising the organization's profile, engaging in strategic planning, and then granting out, in some cases, money to others, or just buying things for folks that they need, their constituents need. So it really is, I think, important to recognize that this isn't just about strengthening individual organizations. It has given these individual organizations the freedom and confidence to be able to work in partnership more effectively. And how's anything going to change? It's not going to be one organization, right? It's going to be organizations working together. That's the way this sector works. So that's a major sort of bucket of uses of the funds, just to do the work, to execute the mission. But folks are also shoring up their financial sustainability. So if you can't read this, this is about contributing to reserves and endowments, building financial reserves, contributing to an existing endowment, creating a new endowment, creating a fund for special opportunities, or starting a capital campaign. And then the final area, sort of broad category of uses of the funds, is just strengthening the operational capacity. So this is about hiring staff or consultants to take on new or existing work. A number of folks dealt with salary issues, salary equity issues, or underpaying frontline workers, and they were having a hard time retaining them. Upgrading the organization's technological infrastructure and professional development for leadership and staff. Okay, final finding I want to talk to you about has to do with what unintended consequences might there have been. We heard a ton of concern. Other funders are going to pull back, and these organizations are going to have trouble. When we really probed people, what we heard was there have been few challenges or disruptions, such as declines in other funding as a result of these grants. Instead, leaders were able to address longstanding needs and reported increased confidence and credibility for their organizations. And what they say is the main lesson here is trust us, have more trust in us. So why were there few challenges allocating the funding? Well, because most folks have a plan, right? Like they had plans in place that they could accelerate, or they had gaps that could be filled, or they were dealing with emergencies like a pandemic or the racial justice reckoning. And so it wasn't, I think we underestimate, I don't know what MacKenzie Scott thinks, right, because I've never talked to her, but I think she thinks, if I had to guess, that we underestimate the skill and ability of nonprofit leaders to know exactly what needs to be done in their communities, right? And her approach to giving is placing that trust in them, and they know what to do. So, fascinating to realize that the impact on fundraising was more likely to be positive than negative. So when we asked, detailed questions about, did you see an increase or a decrease in restricted or unrestricted gifts from foundations or individual donors, more likely to report increase than decrease. And the folks interviewed said, no, it has generally made our fundraising easier, not harder. Now, were there some particular anecdotes of other funders saying, hey, well, why do you need our money now? Yeah, absolutely, there were. But those were outnumbered by the examples that leaders told us of other funders saying, they want to get in and support them. They notice them now, increased credibility, but also an ability to be more strategic in your fundraising when you have the security of that kind of unrestricted giving. You don't have to chase grants that might lead to a sort of mission creep, and you can feel more assertive in asking for what you need. And that goes to that change in mindset that I talked about before. So here's what folks said to us. The Scott gift has made us believe that we are worthy of a gift of this size and importance. We now ask an important question. What would you like your donation or philanthropy to accomplish? We also ask for larger annual contributions. Another leader said, we use the funds to leverage funding from other funders. As it turns out, we have raised more in philanthropic support since receiving the Scott gift. We have received the Scott stamp of approval, and as a leader of color, that stamp of approval has provided me with greater credibility. So we were curious, what did the nonprofit leaders think were the lessons for other nonprofits? And they told us, think bigger. I would encourage other nonprofits to not be afraid to dream big and envision a bright future. And another one was be prepared. I would underscore the importance of having a strategic plan in place, even if you don't necessarily have the funds in place to do it, because it gives you a direction, and you never know when something like this might happen. When we asked about what were the lessons that nonprofit leaders thought this held for other donors, and I alluded to this already, overwhelmingly it's about trust. They hope that their experience receiving these large gifts from MacKenzie Scott encourage other funders to trust nonprofits more than they have to date. It is so refreshing, said one leader, to a veteran nonprofit person to have a donor say, you know what? It's up to me. It's my responsibility to do the research about who I want to support. It's not up to the charities to prove to me why I should support them. And I'm going to do this in a very organized, methodical, data-driven way. And then I can trust them 100% because of the research that I've done about the organization. Now, I want to say, I'm not here with rose-colored glasses on, in the sense that there are also critiques of Scott's approach that are worth thinking about and considering. So one thing I know is that folks who haven't received a gift but are in fields where other peer organizations have, and the folks who haven't don't know why, they're frustrated. And they don't know who to talk to, and it's really not clear. So I think there are critiques about transparency, and I think those are worth thinking about, talking about, considering. And I know that the folks at Bridgeband, have heard some of those critiques and are thinking about it as well. But I think there's so much to be learned from Scott's approach. And I started out by saying, well, she's giving out a whole different level in terms of total money out the door than your clients are, I'm assuming, unless one of you is advising her. But I think there are broad lessons for any donor, and I don't want to be overly simplistic about it, but I want to boil it down and say, I think, as that last leader was saying, choose carefully and then trust. Leaders know best how to allocate resources for their organizations. Can we please be done with I want to support the food pantry, but only the food, not the rent that is necessary for the venue in which the food is served, not the staff whose salaries are necessary for them to recruit the volunteers who serve the food. Come on, right? Why do we think we know best how organizations should allocate their resources? We had this great webinar yesterday, and I think we'll put the video out soon. And one of the leaders said, look, when you're in a restaurant, do you go back and look over the chef's shoulder and say, hey, are you doing that right? Do you put a little more salt? No, you have some trust. Recognize, I think this is really important, that nonprofit organizations matter, that they matter as organizations. So one thing I've heard is people say, oh, she doesn't really have a strategy. She's not strategic. And I think what they mean is she's not defining the end outcomes. We will reduce poverty by 10% in this area. We will reduce, homelessness by 17% in this area. And I suppose if those are the only goals that you think, are legitimate from the standpoint of being strategic, I guess I could see the point. But I think what she's saying is, no, my strategy is to strengthen institutions that are effective, that have been carefully vetted, working in issues, areas, and communities that I care about. And I would say she's been highly strategic, if that's her goal, because these organizations matter and they need to be here for the long haul. Third one is just support the people. The way you give can empower people or it can disempower people. And one of the great frustrations to me in my now 21 years doing this work is the negative stereotypes people have about people who work at nonprofits. It's unbelievable. As Julie said, I got an MBA, and I worked in strategy consulting in the corporate world for a little while, and I sometimes get phone calls from classmates, and it's like, hey, Phil, it's 10 minutes about all their successes and, how rich and powerful they are. And then they say, but I want to dial it back and, have a better work-life balance. And so I'm thinking about going into nonprofit work. And I'm like, get out, leading a nonprofit takes everything it takes to lead an equivalent-sized business and a ton more. It's harder, not easier. It's way harder. We need to give people the respect that they deserve for this work. It is hard work. If we didn't see that in the last 2.5 years, we weren't looking. Finally, equity matters. And it can really be advanced through giving. Structural inequities are everywhere. Yet, you can go to foundation websites with programs in the environment or education. I'm talking about the domestic grant-making strategies that don't even mention race or racism. But the data tells us that we have structural inequities. The data tells us that there is structural racism that is affecting people's likelihood of living near pollutants, children's likelihood of being meted out different kinds of discipline in school. This stuff matters, and we have to think about how our philanthropy is creating more equity and combating inequities. And worse, we have to avoid contributing to inequities, right? Which I think philanthropy can also do if we're not careful. Okay, I want to say this, MacKenzie Scott put out one of her Medium posts. That's really the only way she communicates about her philanthropy on Monday. And I would encourage you to read it. It starts with a poem that she really likes, and it ends with these 2 sentences. And I want to close here, and then if we have time for questions, open it up. She said, "I needn't ask those I care about what to say to them or what to do for them. I can share what I have with them to stand behind them as they speak and act for themselves." Thank you.
Let's give Phil a huge hand. Thank you so much for being here. So I am Danita Dehaney, and I have the privilege of running this organization. And I first want to thank Mary Catherine Morales and the team of professional advisors with whom she worked to conceive of this great idea. Phil, thank you for joining us for the inaugural program. And now we have a few moments for some questions. So I know this is not a shy group. What's on your mind? What would you like to ask Phil? He came all the way down from Washington, or Massachusetts, to be with us this morning. So who's got the first question?
Hi. Thank you so very much. This has been very good.
Hold on.
No, very enlightening.
We have a microphone for you.
Okay. The question that I have is, because it wasn't clear, do organizations approach MacKenzie's organization to solicit donations, or do they independently decide on who they're going to provide these donations to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry you're right, I wasn't clear about that. In the report, which is on our website, cep.org, you can download it easily, free. You don't have to give any personal information. We explain that in about half the cases, I think, people were just notified you got a gift. And in fact, it's created some confusion, right? Like I got an email from somebody whose name I didn't recognize with this message about how, they represent some donors who were interested in supporting the Center for Effective Philanthropy. And I forwarded it to my colleagues and said, do you think this is fake? And many people had that experience, right? And then my colleague Kevin was like, no, there's someone with that name, I found on LinkedIn who works in philanthropy. There's almost nothing on her bio, but, she's some kind of advisor. I think you should talk to her. And I talked to her, and she said, we've decided, we're going to give you $10 million. And I reverted to the second grade version of myself. And I started saying, for real? Oh, is my mic off? You didn't turn it off. Did I turn it off? Hello? Yeah? I'm good now? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Howard. So, anyway, that's how some people learned. Other people did have a call to say, we want you to meet with our consultants, and usually it was the folks from Bridgespan, I think, who would ask some questions and do some additional vetting. But there's no way to apply. And this goes to the point that I made about some frustration among some folks. I have a friend who is a great leader, and I don't understand why her organization didn't receive a gift, and neither does she, And it is frustrating, because her board's like, what's wrong with us? Why didn't we get one? So I think that's been a frustration for some. But the vetting is all really done in advance. And that kind of goes to the point that the leader was making, who said something to the effect of why don't the donors take on more of the responsibility and have, in doing the work instead of making us jump through so many hoops.
That was an excellent question. Yes, Tandy.
Would you consider, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, this was amazing. Would you consider in a couple years going back and redoing your survey to follow the success or the journey, or maybe the not success, once these folks have a few years under their belts, and to determine, how the funds were actually used and what place that it brought them to?
Yes, I'm going to shout while we get new batteries. Actually, better yet, I'll just use this. Yeah, all right. Yes, so as I mentioned at the outset, this is my first time presenting this research, and I failed to mention this is the first year of a 3-year study. And so absolutely, I think it's going to be so important. So we got to have all the caveats. It's a moment in time. There may be unintended consequences in the future that we don't see now. There's a lot to explore. And some of the funders of the research have said, is 3 years really enough? Like, maybe you should be tracking this for 10 years. And I'm like, okay, yeah, if you want to support us to do it for 10 years, that's fine. Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. Yeah.
Next question, right here. Oh, here we go.
Hi there. Do you know anything about the vetting process that was employed during this mass giving?
Not much beyond what I just said about Bridgespan's role, and the fact that some folks just got notified out of the blue and other folks had to answer some questions. So I have lots of friends at Bridgespan. They're a big nonprofit consultancy. They were kind of spun out of Bain like 23 years ago or something. They won't talk, like you can even feed them a couple drinks and they won't talk about their work with MacKenzie Scott. So I've tried to understand more, but we don't have a lot of insight as to what happens before folks get word that they're either gonna get a grant or they're gonna be interviewed.
Okay, yes.
Just real quick one. Given the average size of the grant of like $8 million, what is kind of the database? Like how many not-for-profits are in that, and how many grants did you give as a percentage? So we're kind of talking about what the vetting process is. Did you give to 5% of the eligible, or is it 50%? Like, yeah.
That's an excellent question that I do not know the answer to. I will tell you that these organizations tended to be larger in budget size at the median, significantly so, than the typical nonprofit, right? So, I mean, in typical nonprofit, the sector is so diverse, right? Like that includes like your local soccer, association or whatever. So let's instead say organizations that are funded by foundations. At the median, the budget size is about 1.6 million, which compares to the budget size of these organizations, which was about 8 million, which coincidentally happens to be the size of the median grant. And we looked at this all kinds of ways to understand, differences. I mean, one of the interesting things was that organizations led by people of color who received grants tended to be smaller, 5 million at the median, as opposed to the organizations with white leaders. We could talk about that. So I do think that there's some effort on her part to try to fund organizations that she thinks have historically been underfunded, that are highly effective. But as to your very good question about like how much has she saturated the sort of market, if you will, of potential recipients, I don't know the answer. It's a very interesting question.
Yes.
Thank you. So I was wondering, she obviously has a consultant. I was wondering what percentage of donors sort of and I know no one's in her realm of giving, use a consultant or someone like the Community Foundation that's helping them sort of parse through which organizations are effective, because she might be willing to give donations that have no strings attached because she's done extra vetting versus an individual who then wants to tie because they don't have someone who's helping them.
Well, I think that's such a great question. I mean, so I think for donors at sort of her level, I mean, there aren't many people with her net worth. I mean, there are some, her ex-husbands, Jeff Bezos, let me be clear, his net worth is obviously significantly in excess of hers, and yet he's given less so far in absolute and I believe relative terms. But most typical would be to set up a foundation, right? A big staff foundation. And she has chosen not to do that. I don't know why. What I would say is that whatever level you're at, right? Like there are resources that can help you with this vetting, and I think your community foundation is an ideal one, right? Like if you're giving locally, and so it's not a perfect analogy, but just as she has relied on Bridgespan to do the vetting of potential folks in her areas of interest, I think your clients can rely on the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin counties to help you and make those matches. And I think community foundations really showed how vital they are in doing that. I mean, we've known it for over 100 years since they've been around, but in the wake of the pandemic, where there were so many folks who wanted to do something, didn't know what to do, went to the community foundation, and they said, like, yeah, actually we do know what to do, and they guided people.
Great question. Are there other? Yes. Lisa.
Thanks. I was just curious, prior to this, have there been any studies looking at unrestricted gifts versus restricted gifts? What are the percentage of unrestricted gifts prior to this? Because obviously, the magnitude is what gets, I think, most of the attention here. And I have to assume that there are many unrestricted gifts that are given before. The magnitude makes it, puts it in the limelight, obviously. But I'm just wondering what was the status before
Great
you
question.
looked at these large gifts?
Yeah, and funny you should ask, because we've studied this over the years. So the percentage of grants that are unrestricted from larger staffed foundations has essentially been stuck at about 20% from at least 2001 to 2020. We looked at this, I can't even remember the year, many, many years ago, 15, 16 years ago, and looked at attitudes of program officers and CEOs about unrestricted grants. And there were all kinds of worries about like accountability and measurement and stuff. And then we looked at it again, collecting data in 2019 and early 2020, but it was all pre-pandemic. And what we found is that attitudes had shifted. So leaders were much more open to the idea that general operating support might be good for the organizations they fund and for their ability to achieve impact. But guess what? Weirdly, practices had not shifted. So it was something like, I know I should exercise, but I'm not going to, and then the pandemic hit, and we tracked, what happened, right? And what happened is folks realized the utter absurdity of a leader who's doing programs for youth that are in person, right? Who's funded to do that program, and then a pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, because of the particular community they're serving, some of those folks don't have food because they're not getting food in school. And so what they want to do is move their programs from in-person to online, and they want to partner with the food bank to feed people, but they got to call all their funders and say, hello, you made a grant to us for this, can we use it for that? And funders were like, okay, no, do not waste your time with that stuff. And so many large foundations, unrestricted, restricted grants, made more unrestricted grants, streamlined processes, and we studied this in a series of 4 reports that are on our website called, the last one of which is called Lasting Change, ? And I think there's reason to believe that we're really gonna see changes in the data now. The data lags on this, so it's a little hard to know how meaningful they will be, but I think there's been a reconsideration of this whole issue. And I think we are starting to see more propensity, to give in an unrestricted way, and more of a realization that, like the way I tend to think about it, and my colleague Paul Shoemaker, who founded Social Venture Partners, is that what they're called? He said, look, if you don't trust a nonprofit enough to trust its leadership to allocate the budget, and their goals overlap with yours, then why are you funding them at all, right? Now, I'm not an absolutist on anything. Everything's nuanced. Is there ever a reason to give a restricted grant? Of course. Like, if you're funding a research study at a university, you don't give them a general support grant and just hope the research might get done, right? So it's not that restricted grants never have a place, but rather than it being sort of 20-80 the way it is, I would suggest it's probably better to be 80-20 the other way. And that the greatest source of frustration, we know this from tens of thousands of surveys of nonprofits, from many, many interviews with nonprofits over many years, for all the research I did for my book, and I did a lot, the biggest frustration for nonprofit leaders is they can't plan with one-year program restricted grants. They can't spend the money where they think they need to spend it. They can't invest in their own capacity, and they can't be agile and adapt when the situation changes.
Excellent question and terrific and insightful answer. Are there other questions amongst, yes, all the way in the back, Carolyn, CK.
Said, would you say that there's a risk for this $14 billion influx to reveal the inadequacy of the nonprofit sector to address the structural inequalities that may be better addressed by government, legislative process, etc.? I'm a reader, and I'm your daughter, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, I mean, so I worry about giving a 10-minute answer, which I know is not in the cards. So let me say it this way. We need each sector to work on this stuff. And oftentimes, one of the things about, like, I'm a fan of Anand, and I know him a bit, his argument about let's not assume that, like, companies are going to solve all our greatest problems, right? Like, we should be a little cynical about the degree to which publicly traded companies especially are going to suddenly decide to prioritize doing what's right over profit and return to shareholders. Like, I'm with him there. But the notion that, like, the government is always, and to make that argument at the particular time that he did, right? That the government is always best positioned to do work, and that there doesn't need to be, like, I don't want to get too political here, but I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit. Like, who was at the border trying to stop families from being separated by the government? Nonprofits supported by philanthropy. Who is working to reform our racist, messed up criminal justice system, which is a function of government policy, right? Like, our elected leaders have put a system into place that is seriously messed up. So, who supported Brian Stevenson when he was getting Equal Justice Initiative off the ground? Philanthropy, right? So let's not just kick it to the curb and say, like, oh, in this utopia that we can imagine that has never existed on planet Earth anywhere, the government will handle everything beautifully. We need the tension. We need community organizing. We need, people calling people out. We need the work of nonprofits. And so I just don't think it's an either or. And yes, should we push for legislative change and policy change too? Absolutely, of course we should. And nonprofits sometimes have a role in that too.
That was great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Janita.
you very much.
Thank you.
So, before we close out, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our board chair, Julie Fisher Cummings, for her vision and her leadership and her support for allowing my team to think outside of the nine dots, if you will, to improve our relevancy for you, a very important audience for us. I also want to recognize Chip DePaula, who is a newly appointed board member. He's sitting right here. Chip, please stand up. Chip is relatively new to Palm Beach, and he has leaned into our community. He's going to chair our philanthropy committee, and he understands the importance that you all play in helping us to facilitate and inspire philanthropy in this community. So thank you for trusting us and joining us at this important point in our history. Then the last thing I want to say is that Phil talked about the importance of organizations having a strategic plan. We just completed a strategic planning process, thank you, Julie Fisher Cummings, and it's called Leading for Good. And when you all actually dive into it, you will see that in Strategic Priority 4, there are objectives and initiatives directed at professional advisors. We recognize that we have fallen short in helping you to help your clients. And part of what this initiative is about is to give you information and education around topics that may present themselves appropriately in your conversations with your clients. So with that, I have one question for you. What did you hear in today's presentation, one insight that you will share in your next client meeting? Don't everybody raise your hand at once. Yes, April Hicks from Martin County.
It was very foggy there this morning. That really we don't trust the people in the trenches leading the not-for-profits enough. And we are second guessing when we're trying to figure out what should we give and how should it be used.
That's really music to our ears, April. Thank you. April has been at this for a very long time, and for us to hear that that's an insight that you're going to take to your client meetings, we thank you for that. I'm going to give another person a chance to offer an insight that they would take to their clients. Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
My name is Rachel Anderson.
Okay, Rachel.
So we advise, a number of clients that have significant wealth, and I'm thinking of a new client right now that I have who was recently the beneficiary of an inheritance and has set up a foundation that she's taking very seriously. It's kind of her pride and joy right now, and they're having trouble giving away kind of the required amount of money that they need to right now because they feel a huge amount of pressure to be, make responsible decisions and figure out, what they can do to be most productive with, the resources they've been blessed with. So I think, a good takeaway from this meeting is to tell them that it's okay to feel the way that they do, and that maybe, it's reasonable to have more trust in the nonprofit community to kind of do what they do best with what, donations they can make.
Rachel, thank you for that. We appreciate hearing that as well. So this is the first in a series of 4 programs that your community foundation is bringing to you, thanks to the team that was recognized earlier and their work with our Vice President for Philanthropic Services. So let me just say, lastly, and I'll close, if you have any ideas or suggestions about how we can make this better and more effective for you, please reach us. We are coachable, we respond to feedback, and our goal is to help you enhance your relationships with your clients. So with that, I will bring this session to close and just thank you for spending your morning with us. Thank you.